Hello and welcome to the second tutorial on how to recreate asteroids. In this tutorial, however, I am going to show you mostly how the scripts are used, and we're not really going to look at asteroids itself, more how the scripts that I've created are intended to be used in your scene and how to configure them. So I'm going to start with the JavaScripts. Again, there are C# scripts that are exactly the same as the JavaScripts, except they're in C#. Again, we're going to do the JavaScript scripts in this tutorial. I'm going to use those instead of the C#. We have a blank scene in front of us. I am going to show you the blink, how that works. It's the simplest script we have. Going up into the game object pull down menu, because what I want to do is just create a simple cube here in the world. We're way far away from it. Here is a great way to zoom into any object. It's selected, it's way out there. I'm going to press the F key on the keyboard and we're going to zoom right into that guy. F key is your friend, remember F key. Select an object, press F key. In this case though, I have it in a Unity sometimes creates objects in random places, just probably so they don't overlap. I'm going to set this back to the origin, back to 0, 0, 0 in the world, and since I still have it selected, I'm going to hit the F key, and we should zoom back there. There we are. So here's our cube in the center of the world. I now am just going to take this blink script, and I'm going to drag it onto the cube, and now when I hit the play button, that cube will blink on and off. There it is, blinking on and off. And you notice when I hit play, we went right over to it. We were in the scene view, and hitting play typically has the game automatically switch over to the game screen. And the reason the cube is pretty much black and the background is blue, there are no lights in our scene, and the camera is set to have blue be the background of everything. Otherwise, if we had a skybox, it'd be showing the skybox. But okay, let's do a few things that are a little more interesting. Let's stop the game from playing, and it's going to be easier to see some of the things I'm going to show you if we can see both the game screen and the scene. So click on the game tab, tear it off, hold and drag it off, and then drag to the side where you can see how it embeds itself. We're going to let it embed in the side there and let go. And now we have two views. We can see our scene view, and we can see the game view. I'm going to set this back to 16 by 9, the standard ratio of most things these days. Okay, so here's our object that blinks. Let's add a couple more things to the scene. Let's give ourselves light, one of the standard lights to use just to begin with. A good one to start with is not a point light, but so there's point light is a single point in the world and light radiates out from that point. But instead, let's do a directional light. This type of a light casts from one direction, like down on top of everything. So in this case, it's pointing down in the Y, and it's pointing like out into the X a little bit more. And if we look over here in the scene view, we can kind of get an idea. It gives us an idea of what direction it's going to cast. If I sit here and play with it a little bit, I'm going to change my rotation. This button up here changes the axis from world view to local view. If I go ahead and press, how to manipulate things in the world. Here's some keyboard shortcuts. W on the keyboard puts us in translation mode, as we already are in. E, which is right next to the W, puts us in orbit or rotation mode, so now we can rotate this object, and R puts us in scale mode that allows us to scale an object, but since this is a light, we really aren't going to see anything with the scale. What we want to get to is the rotation, I'm going to put it back into global rotation. So now take a look. Let's zoom in a little tighter. So I rotate this light around, you can see how it changes the light casting on this cube. So let's go ahead and that's going to work for us a little bit. We'll just use that. And then we can really, back into rotation mode or translation mode, we can actually drag this thing just away so it's not in our view any longer, and it doesn't matter. Again, it casts. It doesn't matter where it is. It always casts that angle. So pulling it away gives us just more space to work with without having to have it take up screen space. Let's do something else. Let's create another object. This one I'm going to create another cube. I'm going to put it at the center of the world. And I am going to make it a little bit large. So we're going to scale. We're going to scale it out 30 units in X and 30 units in Z. Kind of what I'm hoping for here is to give us a floor. And now if I move it down 1 unit in Y, -1, now it's going to sit right below where most objects will come into the scene. So rather than being at 0, it's now at -1, and now when we drop objects into the world, they'll sort of sit here on top of it. It's getting kind of hard to see a little bit, so let's talk about materials. There are several materials in this file that I have, and again, you'll be able to remember to download the new set, the new asset set, the new asset package for this file. You'll find it linked right below. There'll be a link to it right below, because this has a few updated scripts that the previous package did not have, so make sure to get the latest here. So real fast, let me demonstrate how to create a material. To create something in Unity, right click and tell it what it is you want to make. We want to make a new script file, we want to make a new shader, whatever. In this case, we want to make a new material, and it created it for us in the directory that we're viewing. Let's call this color. Well, we have a color floor. Let's call it color floor danger. Yeah, floor. If we were going to have a room where the floor is dangerous, this would be the color. Okay. And then look over on the right. We're not going to do anything fancy. This is just going to be a color. So on the right hand side in the inspector for this object that I just created, which I still have selected, click on the color swatch. It'll give us a pop-up with asking us what color we want it to be. And of course, danger's got to be red, right? We're going to, we're going to leave it as red. So closing that out, we can then take danger floor and drag it onto, which one? I didn't name my cube. Which one of these cubes is going to be my floor? We're going to just drag. I selected and drug color floor danger up to the hierarchy, and I'm about to release it on top of the second cube, which is probably the floor because I created it second. No, okay. So we now have a red box in the world, which is how we just attached that material that we created to the box. Let's name these so we won't make that mistake again. Cube is now going to be floor, and the cube that we first created, we're going to call it a wall because more than likely that's what we're going to use it for. Okay, zooming in, looking at my cube. So from now on, I'm just going to use some of the other colors that I already created. So grab the standard floor color, select it, drag it and put it on the floor object. And then, you know what, I think my previous wall colors might have been red. So let's just stay with colors. I'm going to drag wall on top of wall. Yeah, it's a slightly different color red. Okay. I just dragged two colors onto two objects, or two materials onto two objects, and now we have a floor and an object on the floor. And this object on the floor, this wall piece, if you look to the right, let's look at the floor first. If we look at the floor, that was an object I created and with nothing special, right? I just created a cube and I scaled it. Let's take a look what's on this cube, on this floor object. These are the standard things. Whenever you create something up here from the game object and create other list, these objects in here come with a number of things by default for the kind of object that you're creating. In this case, a cube always comes with a transform, a mesh object that can be shaded and drawn and whatnot. Below this, and each of these things are what are called components. So here's a component pull down menu. You can find most of these things in this menu. If an object you have didn't already come with some component that you want, you can typically add it from this pull down menu. So again, in this case, a brand new object, a brand new cube comes in with a transform, a cube mesh, a box collider. And a collider is an important thing if you ever want to detect if something has moved into your object. In this case, this box collider will keep a physics-based object from moving through it. And we'll get back to that in a little bit in a minute. This other component down here, the mesh render component, is a script from Unity. All these are scripts basically from Unity that allow this mesh render component allows this object to be drawn on the screen. And each component, as you see, has different aspects, different things that we can change about them. In this case, let's take a closer look at the mesh renderer. There's this checkbox. Most components are able to be turned on or off. The only two that typically can't be are the transform, because there's nothing to turn on or off about that. Unity kind of needs to always know where in the world something is, what scale it should be, how it's rotated. So the transform is something that typically can't be turned off. Most other things can be. The box collider, for example, could be turned off if we didn't need it, or if we wanted something to pass through this object, we could turn off the box collider and something could pass directly through it. This mesh render, if we want it to not draw it, and in fact, this is how the blink script works. We'll take a look at it in a little bit. The blink script enables and disables the renderer. That's all it does. Enables and disables the renderer over time. If we wanted this thing to cast a shadow, there's a checkbox for that. If we want it to receive shadows, there's a checkbox for that. And the materials that this render, or that the mesh renderer uses, if we open this up, there is the material that we created and drug onto this object. And then there's another example of it. If we want to change it, it's right below the next component down. So there's a little bit on objects in Unity and how they're created with multiple components to allow them to be what you need them to be. All right, let's move on a little bit. Let's see, what else should I do? Let's make this wall object a little bigger, and let's take off the blink script that I created. Well, actually, let's take a look at the blink script. So here's the cube. Here is the here are the components that make up this cube, and one extra component you'll notice different from the floor is the blink script that I drug on earlier, as well as the other components. We have this enable and disable box, so if we didn't want to blink, we could just disable it and it would no longer blink. Another part of this component, something that I added to this script, is the ability to change how this script operates. Change how, in this case, just how fast I want it to blink. Right now it's set to blink at 1 second. Let's go ahead and make it faster. I'm going to have it blink in 1/4 of a second. I'm going to hit play, and let's see if in fact it does that. Yep, look, it's blinking faster than it was before. And notice in this case it's doing what I talked about earlier. See how this checkbox is checking and unchecking? That's all this script does. It's going in there and it's enabling and it's disabling the render component. Makes the box look like it's blinking. Let's stop that. Let's look at a couple of other things. First, let me go ahead and create this. Let's remove the script because we don't want our wall blinking. To remove a component from something, again, a script is just a component. We're going to right-click on the component, and I'm going to say remove component in the pop-up menu that appears. And now that component is no longer part of this object. If I hit play, it's not blinking, just as we expect, because the script is no longer part of it. For our little game world, let's make this a top-down game. To do that, I'm going to come over here, and one of the objects, whenever you create a scene, one of the objects that come in by default is a camera. If you noticed at the beginning of this video, I should have pointed it out probably. The camera object was in the scene and nothing else was, no lights or anything. Let's go ahead and point our camera straight down, because we're going to sort of make this a top-down third-person sort of game. I'm going to hit the E key to turn on the rotation tool. Click and rotate. See how the camera is now pointing down at the world? I'm going to point it straight down at the world. And then I'm going to press the W key. I'm going to go into transform mode, and I'm going to back it off. And actually we're going to, let's center it right above everything. And it's probably easier. I'm going to move over here to the inspector panel, and let's just put a 0 in X, sorry, a 0 in Z. X already has a 0, and it looks like we're 20 units above the floor, 20 something. Let's just even that out and make it 20. So in case we need to know, we can figure out that we're 20 units off the floor. Maybe that's a little far. Let's see what 10 looks like. Okay, 10's probably a little more interesting for our purposes. So there's our game view, our camera. We're not going to use the entire floor. We're going to just look down at the center for a little bit. I'm going to click the wall object, hit the F key so I zoom into it. So Alt, left mouse button allows me to orbit around something I've selected, holding down the Alt key still, and this time holding down the mouse wheel allows me to pan around, or rolling the mouse wheel allows me to move in and out. So that's how we transform, that's how we move around in this world. Another way to move around the world, if you're used to 3D shooters and whatnot, hold down the right mouse button, and that allows you to sort of look around. You can also, though, as long as you're still holding down the right mouse button, hold down the W key to like move forward in the world, so you're just kind of flying around. S moves you backwards. A and D allow you to strafe. So this is an alternate way to move around in Unity if you feel like it. Oh, and looks like Q, that's right, Q and E allow you to change your altitude. so up and down and Z. Sorry, up and down and Y. Unity is a Y up type of game engine. So Y is up and down. Okay. Let's go ahead and create our walls. We're just going to border our game level here with walls so that we can't. That's interesting. I rotated my camera strangely. What I'd like to do is when I drag left and right. Okay, so we'll look at it that way. Okay. So when I drag left and right, we in the perspective scene view, I want to see the same direction happening in the game view. Just makes my brain look at it easier. All right, so let's put this at Z0, and in this case I'm going to use the scale, so I'm going to hit R on this object, pressing the R key. There we go. We're into scale mode, and I'm going to scale this guy until, there we go, until it's filled the camera in the game view. Like that. It's going to work for me. Let's go ahead and make we're going to duplicate this object because I want to make another wall. I don't want to have to go create a new one. So with wall selected, I can hold down the control key, press the D as in dog key, and it actually made a second one. You see how there's a second wall, both named the same, over in the hierarchy view. I'm gonna go back to transform mode, grab that arrow and move this copy to the other side of the screen. There it is on the other side of the screen. I'm going to make another copy, press Control D again, and this time I am going to pull it back to the center, and I'm going to rotate it because I want I want a piece for that's going to border the bottom. So pressing E, I get my orbit or my rotation controls up. I'm going to rotate it, and let's make sure it's straight. So I'm going to go over here into the control and to the inspector panel, type 90 to make it nice and straight. Move it down to the bottom. Ooh, looks like I need to scale it a little larger. Pressing the R key gives me the tool. Scaling it out a little larger. There we go. Control D again to make a copy. Pressing W to get my move tool. Moving it to the top of the screen. Alright, now we have a little world that is got borders on all sides, so we can't fall out of the game world when we get our player character in there. Speaking of player character, let's create ourselves a player character. This time I'm going to go back and make a cube that's unscaled. Clicking cube. We now have a new cube in the world. And this guy, before I forget where it is and all that, let's name this guy Player. P-L-A-Y-E-R, Player. Alright. And we're going to put our player at the center of the world. Just right in the middle. Let's give him a color. Dragging from my materials, I'm going to drag color player onto the player object in the hierarchy, and our player is going to be green. What next? In case, it's always good to move anything that's physics-based slightly above the floor. So and this isn't really physics. Since our floor has a bound, or has a collider on it, when I drag the character controller onto this object that we're going to use as our player object, it has a little kind of a gravity system built into it. So really all it does, though, is move down in Y. It just continually tries to move it down in Y until it runs into something. And in this case, it's running into the floor, and that's where it's going to stop. However, if it was inside the floor at all, like touching it might be like decimal points inside the floor, and it could just fall through the world right on start because it thought it was inside, possibly. All right, in the project directory, I'm going to click on scripts, or in our JavaScript directory, I'm going to now find the character controller. Here we go. Controller underscore player. Grab that script, hold it down, drag it up to the hierarchy, let it go on top of player. Let's look now over in the inspector for the player object to see what we have. We have two new components that you're not familiar with, that don't come along standard with a cube object, just got added. When I drug the controller underscore player script onto this object that I named player, it automatically added another component. This component is called character controller. It's a component that comes along with Unity. Like all these other components that you can find here in the pull down menu, there's all kinds of stuff. There's the mesh renderer, a text renderer, there's effects like a particle system that does a lot of great stuff. You can do trails and lines and halos and lens flares. Under physics, there's a lot of things, like there's box collider that we saw that we were familiar with from earlier. One of the things here is the character controller. So if we wanted to add it by hand, these things are typically here under components somewhere. But in this case, I told the script that we're going to need a character controller, and if there isn't one when it's applied to the object, go ahead and add it anyway. So that's how it got there. That's why we didn't need to add it by hand. I'm going to, well, we're probably just going to run with the defaults for the moment, see what happens. Alright, now that our player is in the world and the script has been applied to this object, let's see what happens. Press the play button. Ooh, did you see that? It dropped down slightly into the world. This player object, pressing the W key, should move him forward. Ah, there he goes. Pressing the S key moves him backwards. And instead of strafing, the A and D key rotate this simple player character controller. Or the player controller just rotates this character. It's a very simple, all it's meant to do is get you into the game, get your game just doing something. And there he goes, moving around the screen for us. He's probably moving a little slow for my taste, so I'm going to change that speed from a 3 to a 6. We're going to double his speed. He's still moving slow. Let's try 10. Oh, wow, he's still moving slow for me. Let's try 15. Okay, that's a little more reasonable. Alright, so something to notice. I played around with those numbers. I changed the speed. Let's now stop playing the game. So I changed the speed to 15, right? Let's stop playing the game. Click on the play button, which is going to stop it, and put our character, even though we drove around the scene, Unity does this cool thing about putting anything that we moved, it puts it back to where we had it. So that way our game world doesn't get destroyed. Just trying to test it. Also notice though, any inspector configurations that I change get changed back. If we were in play mode, anything that we change in the inspector gets changed back to what it was before gameplay started. So in this case, it was a, did I say 15? It was a 15, and now it's set back to its default of 3. So now that we're not playing the game, let's type in 15, hit enter. It'll now stay. So if I hit play, I drive our character around, yahoo! It now is going to stay. What else to show you? Let's look at some other components, some other scripts that I wrote. And again, this, or maybe I didn't even say it yet. These scripts are intended to be building blocks for you to set up your own world, set up your own game. A place to start trying to prototype whatever game it is you want to build. These scripts are not going to be the final scripts for whatever your project is. They're a basic set of scripts to give you an idea on what to do and kind of start working things out. You are really going to want to edit these scripts to get them to get the game to function the way you eventually end up deciding that you want it to function. All right, so let's create another object. I'm just going to create another box. Oh, create other, create cube, putting that cube at the center of the world, just so I know where it is. And this is going to be sort of a door thing. Yeah, so let's center it here. Make it a -6, so it's nice and even. We're going to have this be a door object, so I'm going to scale it. Which way? No, let's scale the other way. I'm going to scale it that direction, so it's going to be a wide door. And then I'm going to create walls on either side of it. It's going to duplicate, Control D, duplicating this wall. Moving it here, moving it down. I'm going to change the scale. Oh, and the way I'm interactively, that's another pro tip here. If you click down, see how the XYZ on any of these in the inspector, you have in the scale you have an X, Y, and a Z, and on each of your definitions for this object, rotate, position, and scale. If you hold down on the letter, in this case I'm left clicking down on the Z, and then I move my mouse left and right, that's another quick way to change the value that's in there. I want to duplicate this because I want to put a wall. Oops, didn't actually duplicate. Control D. Duplicate my guy. And maybe I need to make him a little bit bigger. Okay. So now I have a door object. Let's see how we're getting a little bit of overdraw because it's got a little bit of Z fighting happening. I'm going to make this door slightly smaller so that it doesn't do that, and then we can then also kind of tell the player it's a separate thing. I'm going to make it slightly shorter so we don't get any Z fighting there. Or maybe drop it into the floor. Let me do that. I'm just going to drop it into the floor slightly. Doink. Okay. So here's our door. Do I have a door color? I think I might have. Oh yeah, I have different door colors that I created here. So there's a slide door, and that's what this is going to be. I'm going to take this, drop it onto our cube, which I neglected to name. I'm going to call this door slide. Slide. So this door is going to slide when we open it. To make this door open when we want it to, we need to have some kind of object that's going to trigger that to happen. The way these scripts communicate with each other are through Unity messages. You can have an object, you can have one of your scripts send a message to some other script. Very, very cool way to have pieces of your game talk to other pieces of your game. And that's what we're going to employ here with these scripts. To get that door to move, I'm going to drop onto it the script that says on message slide. See this script right here? I try to name them so that you have an idea of what they do. Anytime a object begins with the name of the object begins with on message, that means, and this is just something I made up for naming these scripts to get an idea of what they do, because you can call them whatever you want. But in this case, anything that's named on message, I intend to be a kind of an object that does something when it receives a message. So take your on message slide object and drop it onto your slide door. when we click on the slide door, or the door slide, notice that we have this extra component that we just dropped on there. In this case, some of the things that you're allowed to tell this, some of the parameters that you're allowed to type in and have this script act differently in different times that you use it, you can change it to, you can tell it what way to slide. So in this case, it looks like we're going to want it to slide in the Z direction, maybe 3 units, because we made it 3 units wide. Let's see if that works. All right, but it's never going to do anything. If I hit play and I go driving around, and I run into this wall, bam, I can't get through the wall. And I also can't get through this door, right? Because I didn't, it has a collider on it, and I'm not allowed to drive through a collider. But I haven't created any triggers, and that's how this door is going to know to open, is if something triggers it and tells it to open. So let's add a trigger into the world. The trigger, I went back and forth onto whether to call one trigger or not. In this case, I called it on collision, and you'll see why in a second. So that's the script. Let's make the object that this script is going to be a component for. In this case, I'm going to create an empty game object, a game object with nothing on it, because there's the box comes with, you know, a box mesh, a draw component that we just don't need, because this is going to be an invisible thing that you walk into. So I'm going to create this invisible object. I'm going to move it to 0, 0, 0 in the center of the world, just so I know where it is. And then I'm going to move it a little bit away so that it's not right where the player begins. But what we are going to need for this is a collider. So with it selected, go to Component, go to Physics, and add a, you know what, let's add a sphere collider so you can get close to this from any direction. Not just, like you can't cut the corner of a cube if we want to make it really big. Let's make this a sphere collider. So with the game object selected, clicking sphere collider adds that component to this empty game object. And again, the empty game object, the only thing it has when you create it is a transform. And it has, again, Unity needs to know where this thing is in the world. With now with the sphere collider added to as a component to this object, we zoom in kind of small, and notice there is a kind of wireframe sphere around the center of this object. Okay, maybe we want to make that a little bit bigger because it's a little bit small. I'm going to hold down on the radius, drag, and make it kind of, you know, a little bit bigger. Move it out here into the world. Okay. So now, let me show you something that's going to happen here. Notice how on other objects, these wall objects, for example, let's look at the box collider that's on this wall component, or on this wall object, the box collider component. There's a word, there's an option here called is trigger, and for the wall, is trigger is not checked. Okay. because this is not a trigger collider. This is in this case, it's a collider that's going to stop something from moving through it. But in the case of the thing that we just created, this game object here, which we're going to call a trigger, I'm going to rename it GRI. Let's call it door trigger. Door trigger has this sphere collider. It's just this collider is round instead of square, like a wall trigger or a wall collider. In this case, I'm going to click yes, this is a trigger, because we want the player to be able to, the player object to be able to move into it rather than collide with it. So here's our sphere collider that we need to be able to detect if something ran into it or not. Now that that's applied, let's go down to our JavaScripts and put on our onCollision send message script. OnCollision send message. Dragging that up, dropping on our door trigger. So now we have a script component on our door trigger that has a number of options in itself. Oh, and you notice what I'm doing here? I'm clicking on the border of this panel. Unity lets you stretch things out a little wider if you need to. In this case, I'm stretching it out because the words that I've given to some of these fields are wider than the space I had before. So if I'm dragging out here a little wider so you can read them. The reason this has so many fields for a message to be able to send is because this onCollision script component that I put in this package for you guys allows you to send messages depending on what happens. So if this was a wall that you want the player to hit, not be able to go through, but still detect that the player hit it, then you would put a send message on collision enter, that as soon as the player object collided with it, then it would send this message that it entered collision with this object. In this case, we want it to be, it's a trigger, and a trigger acts differently, as we discussed. So in this case, we're going to want to have a message sent on when something enters the trigger volume. Let's call this message open door. Okay. So when something enters this volume, the message open door is going to be sent. We haven't told it where it's going to be sent yet. We don't know which object is going to be listening for this message. So, but we need to define that. To do that, let's select on our door slide. So this door slide object is what we want to listen for the message. And let's take a look. The message that we want it to listen for, one of the fields that this script needs to be defined is what message to listen for. So whenever the message door open, whenever it hears that message, it'll go ahead and do the slide. It'll move the distance that we gave it up here. So let's go look at our trigger again. And one of the things underneath all the definitions for the messages, the next thing down is send message to object. You know, what object needs to listen for this? While door trigger is selected, hold down on door slide, but don't let go. Hold down, don't let go, and drag it over to send message to object. Now it knows our door trigger is going to send the message open door to this object, and you see how it highlighted over in the hierarchy, just to remind you. If you click on door slide, it highlights the object that is going to receive the message. Just so you, it's a cool little thing. Just shows you who it is that's going to be listening for this. And I'll describe, and I'll talk about the other parts of it later. So let's test that. Let's see if this is going to work for us. I'm hitting the play button and driving around. Yay, nope, door doesn't open. Okay, turning around. That trigger is over here somewhere, right? Let's go find this trigger. Oops. Why didn't the trigger work? Let's go find out. That's part of developing games, finding out what went wrong. So here is our trigger. On message, enter, send. I'm gonna copy and paste this in case it did something weird about it. Well, that's why it didn't work. It was the wrong message. I typed open door backwards. That would do it. All right. And this is a trigger. Yes. Okay. This time it'll work. I'm certain of it. Pretty much. Driving. Still it didn't work. Oh, that's why it's not working. One more field I forgot to fill in. So not only do you tell it what message to send and what object to send that message to, but you also need to tell it down here in the bottom, do collide with. You can have as many, it needs to listen for, you want it to listen for only particular objects to collide with it. So you don't want, maybe if you have enemy characters in here, you don't want them opening the door by accident if they walk through there. We only want it to trigger on certain objects. In this case, we only want it to trigger when the player walks into it. So to add, so right now it's set to 0 because there's 0 objects that it's listening for. In this case, enter 1, and it's going to give us a field down here to type in the name of the object that we want it to listen for, or to look for. So typing in player, that's the name of our object that it'll now be looking for. So let's try this one more time. Hit play, good as playing, driving. Ah, here it is, door open, yay! Running for door. And there we go. That is a quick little example of how to set up a trigger and have a trigger send a message, have something receive that message to do something in the world. That volume is a little hard to see because, well, it's invisible. Let's do something interesting. I'm going to create a point light just for the fun of it. So under objects, create other, point light. And this point light got created here in the center. Yay, white light. Let's move this point light over here to the center of this object. And let me show you something else. Since the point light is really part of this door trigger, hold down point light and drag it on top of door trigger. Okay, and you let go of it. Now we have the point light as a child of the door trigger. And with that child selected, with point light selected now, if we zero out its position, go over here to the inspector panel and zero out the position, what it does is move it to the same location as its parent. Moves it to the same location as the trigger object. It's slightly higher though. So can I like radiate? Maybe, let's give it a color too. So I'm going to change the color of this light to dark blue. It's a really white blue. Okay. Well, it's a white blue. But we're going to leave that alone for right now. And to draw the player's attention, let's drag the blink script onto the light. And we're going to have that blink kind of fast. We're going to change it to 1/4 of a second of a blink. Let's play the game. So now the light is blinking, kind of trying to drag the player's attention to go over there. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller. So with the point light selected, drag the scale. Oh, actually that's not going to do it. For a light, to change how much range a light affects, look under the inspector, under range. That is what changes how far. See this big sphere now in the scene view? There's that sphere being scaling and up and down. Okay, that is how far that light will cast. So it's only going to cast that little distance. That view, that color isn't casting very well on our the color of the floor we have, but it's just a demonstration for right now, so we're not going to spend too much time worrying about that. All we really want it for is to show the player where to go. So this blinking light is going to hopefully attract the player's attention. They're going to go investigate what that is, and then that is going to open the door for them. Another neat button is in the game view, there's this maximize on play button that's sort of the center of the top of the window, of the game window. Click that. With that now selected, when we hit the play button, it will expand the game view full screen. Alright, so here we are full screen, driving our player character around, just messing around, yeah. Oh, what's this blinking light? Wow, look, it opened the door, yay. Okay, so there you go, a demonstration of how these scripts are intended to be used. With anything that's on key, guess what? When a key is pressed, it will do something. In this script here, whenever you press a key, it will create an object. So some object that you have created, it will spawn that object into the world. There's a place where you tell it what object to spawn. If we look in the prefab directory for the Asteroids game, this missile object is what gets spawned, which is just a glowing sphere. On key send message, you can, if the player, for example, presses M button, maybe you want a map to be displayed, and that would be, you would send the map, send the message to display the map. So there are certain keys that you can have be something interesting for the player, or spacebar to fire a missile. So yeah, so take a look at these different scripts, open them up, see how they work. Now that you know how to use them, see if you can open them up, take them apart, and understand a little bit about how they operate. The next video, I'll actually be going into them with you. In this video, my mission was just to show you how they work. So have a look at the scripts yourself, and then in the next video, I will show you how they operate, how they're created, and all that good stuff. So take care, have fun, create some interesting prototypes, and I'll talk to you next time.